Welcome to the 3x5 news, views, and reviews. Scribble on index cards. We get in and we get out fast, so keep up. The note and drawing of a woman that Trump had submitted for a birthday greeting book that Ghislaine Maxwell had compiled for Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday was released by the House Oversight Committee. It's the same as the one leaked in July. Now that we know it's for reals, we can dissect it. First, Trump famously said, quote, "I never wrote a picture in my life," before he clarified or corrected himself by saying, quote, "I don't draw pictures of women," unquote. But, quote, "wrote a picture," unquote, as dumb as it sounds, reveals exactly what he did. He both used type to fill out the middle of the form of a woman he outlined and used a signature to represent the pubic hair of the woman. Before we analyze the art, I just want to address where Trump writes, quote, "We have certain things in common, Jeffrey," unquote, and later, quote, "May every day be another wonderful secret," unquote. Trump chronicler Michael Wolff said that he thinks that refers to them both dating, if that's the right term for those two sleazebags, the same woman at the same time. But the immediate inclination of most viewers to assume he was speaking about underage women, aka girls, might be closer to the truth when you take into account the image Trump drew. Already much mention has been made of the simple strokes that Trump used to depict the breasts as not fully formed, as on a girl. I wondered if they were meant to underscore the text above them, but the text, quote, "Yes, there is, but I won't tell you what it is," unquote, doesn't seem to stand out enough to be highlighted, to warrant highlighting. It is at this point that we must remark on the proper punctuation of the note, which suggests it was edited. Also, as Trump has claimed that some of his drawings, which were created for auctions, an assistant might have drawn the form. If it was a woman, she might have underplayed the breasts. I mean, what, quote, red-blooded, unquote, American man would reflexively draw breasts that were, if not large, full? I personally don't draw, nor am I a, quote, breast man, but even I wouldn't have depicted breasts that small, if only to avoid being charged with depicting an underage woman. If it was Trump, since drawing the breasts large would probably have been reflexive for him, one can't help but assume that he intentionally drew them small. How wide the hips were drawn, though, might suggest a full-grown woman. But they might only have been drawn that way to trace the width of the type. Whatever the case, as so often with Trump, he quickly leapfrogs icky until he lands on perversion and sexual assault. Remember the 3-hour-plus cabinet meeting on August 26, where they all sang the praises of Trump like he was Saddam Hussein or something like that, and as if their lives depended on it? One can't help but think that there was danger in overdoing it, though. The tyrant might think you are mocking him. And one might think that is how Trump felt when Labor Secretary Lori Chavez-DeRemer said, quote, "Mr. President, I invite you to see your big, beautiful face on a banner in front of the Department of Labor because you are really the transformational president of the American worker," unquote. Yeah, he's transforming the American worker, all right, but into drudges without rights. In March, Trump issued an executive order that, for over 1 million federal workers, sought to end collective bargaining. That's one of those words you hear all the time, but may not know what it means. It's simply a union negotiating with an employer. Returning to Trump, turns out the Labor Secretary's was not the testimonial that evoked suspicion in him. The one that actually did that was the product of the person who might be the closest thing to a friend he has in that group, or anywhere, since his breakup with his former BFF, Jeffrey Epstein. As such, you wouldn't think he felt the need to do this. The cabinet member, that is. The New York Times reported, slightly edited, quote, "And then there was Steve Witkoff, the president's peace envoy, who said," those are air quotes, not a peace sign, "There's only one thing I wish for, that the Nobel," me again, Witkoff pronounces the name of Alfred Nobel as if he'd never heard of him or the prizes named after him before. To begin again, Witkoff said, quote, "There's only one thing I wish for, that the Nobel Committee finally gets its act together." Me again, sure, a top American official insulting the committee should ensure that happens. Retracing Witkoff's words, open quote, There's only one thing I wish for, that the Nobel Committee finally gets its act together and realize that you are the single finest candidate since the Nobel Prize, this Nobel Award, was ever talked about, unquote. Witkoff's praise, the president seemed to pick up on the over. Witkoff's praise, the New York Times reports, open quote, was so slavish and slathering that even the president seemed to pick up on the overkill. During a later question and answer session with reporters and far-right news personalities, unquote, I like how the Times, which often frustrates with its tepidness, differentiate between the two, reporters and far-right news personalities. Anyway, during that Q&A session, Trump remarked how Witkoff, the Times again, open quote, had reassured him that he, Trump, was the only person who could solve the Russia-Ukraine war. I don't know, Trump said. You told me that a few times. Then Trump said, unless he was just saying it to build up my ego, unquote. Who'd have thunk it? But there may actually be too much obsequiousness, even for Trump. Maybe Witkoff was concerned that his history of failure working for the Trump administration was threatening his job. Oh, and don't worry, Trump, you're still a top candidate for the Ig Nobel Award. Read the meeting as a whole. Presumably, most of the cabinet members have spouses who have drunk the Trump aid as well. So they will overlook or even approve of the humiliation. But what about the kids who might see videos of their parents eating shit, or who might be teased at school by the other kids who have seen it? Ha ha ha. Who am I kidding? Kids don't follow the news. As for college-age kids, though, it could be rough on some of them. Turning to ICE, we keep hearing that it is now larger than any military but those of the U.S. and China. That's a cool $30 to $40 billion for 2025. People say that if we didn't spend all the money on that, we could keep people from being thrown off Medicaid and SNAP, food stamps, or more accurately, EBT, which stands for Electronic Benefit Transfer Cards. But with an administration so hell-bent on harming, not helping the American people, that is a futile exercise. I am no defense hawk or militarist and have always thought the defense budget too high. But since the advent of Russia's aggression, I think trimming the defense budget will have to wait until Russia returns to a less expansionist era. In fact, couldn't the money spent on ICE be diverted instead to the defense budget? Especially since the U.S. is lagging on drone development and other weapons for this new age of warfare. And, most importantly, since I view Ukraine's front lines as the West's front lines, we could provide military aid to Ukraine for reals, not just the mercenary, cold-blooded, roundabout scheme of selling weapons to Europe, which, in turn, will pass them along to Ukraine. The defense of Ukraine, Europe, and the U.S. from Russia is all one. It's just a matter of time and distance. Time until Russia covers the distance of Europe and maybe even the U.S. In an aside, if the U.S. continues to isolate and alienate its traditional allies, what if the U.S. is attacked by Russia or China? Who will help us defend ourselves then? Whereas it would have been much of the Western world, like with all our cockamamie wars from Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan, today it might only be Israel, if them. Oh, and El Salvador with his Trump-friendly dictator. Woohoo! Returning to ICE, let's say war breaks out and it's all hands on deck. Can ICE agents be incorporated into the military as soldiers? I guess so, but it would take time. They would have to go back to square one and start out as buck privates, showing my age there. Today they call them private or E1. In other words, ICE is a monumental waste of American money. Let me just insert a gentle reminder that it's our money, taxes that we as taxpayers contribute to this exorbitant, extravagantly wasteful program. Also, by diverting money better spent on national defense, it weakens our national security. Even more so if ICE becomes Trump's personal army guarding polling places. Now, turning to Trump's health, which, as legions of commentators have pointed out, barely makes the news, whereas the legacy media was once obsessed with President Biden's slow fade into oblivion. I am tempted to attribute the only glancing attention that Trump's discolored hands receives because of how it reminds us of depressing tips to facilities for elder care, or more anachronistically nursing homes, to visit our elderly relatives, where it's not uncommon to see very old, obviously immune-compromised residents with large purple blotches on the tops of their hands and forearms. The sight of those both repulses, partly because it reminds us of our own futures and elicits sympathy. Called senile purpura, according to ChatGPT, it most closely resembles Trump's condition. It means that the skin and blood vessels of those afflicted are fragile, not that they are necessarily senile or dying. Though it's undeniable, that's the trajectory they and Trump are on sooner rather than later. Continuing to root about in Trump's dump, I found a morsel about Jeffrey Epstein on the fine YouTube channel Inside the Mind of Donald Trump. Michael Wolff, who wrote 4 books about Trump, said, quote, Donald Trump was best friends with one of the worst persons who have ever existed, unquote. Damning enough, right? If you are not convinced that Epstein is one of the worst persons who ever existed, how about if the sentence was transposed, turned around? Quote, Jeffrey Epstein was best friends with one of the worst persons who ever existed, unquote. Either way, in a sane world, Trump would have been indelibly stained by that. Also, Epstein, over the years, Trump's supporters have been all too happy to listen to and even embrace his lies, if only because they felt like it gave them license to lie in their own lives. Finally, though, just this once, they are asking for the truth. But Trump has proven unable or unwilling to pivot to the truth, a realm where he is clearly out of his element. A final thought about Trump. I recently found it exhilarating when Gavin Newsom labeled him an invasive species. Actually, John Pfeffer of Foreign Policy and Focus said it first. Quote, Donald Trump is kudzu. He is out to strangle anything and everything in his path. Unquote. Well, I've got to go now and clean up the mess Trump has made with his latest dumps.